Hey y'all, what's up? It's your girl Urban Farm Sister. So this evening I wanted to explain to you all um, about seed packets. I know a lot of you go to the stores and you have a lot of questions in regard to what should you purchase, what some of those terms on the packets mean and things like that. So I'm just going to kind of clear up some of that information. So first we're going to start with explaining if something says hybrid. So like this tomato pack, this tomato seed pack here, is called Early Girl Hybrid. When it says hybrid on there, basically what that means is that they crossed two different types of plants. So they crossed probably a beefsteak. Hey James, how are you? Along with maybe like a cherry tomato or something. A hybrid, any type of hybrid, when it says hybrid on the label, whether it's tomatoes or if it's a squash or whatever, that does not mean that it's a GMO. A GMO is a genetically modified organism where they take DNA and they splice genes from one life force and put it into another one. So when it comes to like BT corn, that's a GMO. What they do is they take genes from BT bacteria and they put those genes into the corn, and then the corn will express those genes once that corn develops and you purchase it and things. In all actuality, none of these seed packets that you get from the stores, the grocery stores, they're never going to have GMOs in there. GMO plants are usually the big crops that they use for commercial agriculture. So that would be like your cotton, your canola, corn, soybean, things like that. They make a lot of money off of selling GMO products to commercial farmers. Also, places like Monsanto and things like that, they actually control what those farmers put on their farm. So once those plants grow, Monsanto comes in and says they can't keep those seeds. So Monsanto is not going to sell a GMO product to the general public because they know they can't control that because it's too many of us buying seeds. So whenever you're going to the stores like Walmart or something, 9 times out of 10, you're not going to get anything that's a GMO product. So even if it says it on the label, unless you're trying to be a commercial farmer, unless you contacted Monsanto or all these other big commercial seed companies, you're not going to get a GMO seed. So you can rest assured and you can take that worry off of yourself that the seeds that you're purchasing are GMO. So then we're going to talk about now, when it says on the in the corner, it might say container friendly. So these plants, when they say container friendly on here, they'll stay pretty small, but they still give you a decent yield as far as your harvest. Container friendly plants are good for people that may live in apartments or have confined space, but they still want to grow things. I also recommend people buy container friendly plants when they're actually trying to grow indoors doing hydroponics. The plants, they'll just stay a lot smaller than say the non-container friendly versions. And like I said, you still get a decent harvest. And there's container friendly. Another way they might describe them is as dwarf. It may say dwarf on there, and it may say like hybrid dwarf or whatever on there. Just know that it's a smaller version of a bigger version of a particular plant, and it does very well in containers. Some plants don't do well in containers. Like when it comes to trying to grow sweet potatoes and things, they do not do well in containers. You will have to actually grow those in the ground. But when it comes to other plants, you can grow them in containers. So you want to look for that label, especially if you live in an apartment or if you're going to be growing on a balcony or a patio or even a porch, or you're just going to do container gardening, even if you have a big yard. You want to find container friendly plants. Also, on the back, you always see this map of the United States. So what does this mean? This tells you when to actually plant this particular plant. And it goes by what are called the USDA frost zones. So the USDA has a whole website. You can go on the internet and you can put in your zip code and it'll tell you what zone you actually live in. that zone actually tells you when the first and the last frost is of every year. So on here, if you live, like I live in Ohio, it's in the green area. I live in zone 6A in Ohio. And it tells me that I can plant this directly sow, which I'll talk about that, what that means in a minute. I can directly sow these seeds in in March to April, and again in June and July. This is broccoli. So broccoli is a plant that likes cool weather. If you plant this in the hot July, August sun, what'll happen is it'll start to grow, and then it'll do what is called bolt, where it'll start to flower. And you won't get your broccoli. Broccoli is actually flower buds. So what'll happen? All these little buds will actually flower. You have all these little yellow flowers, and you don't want to. You can eat them. They're just not going to taste good. But you won't have this, because what'll happen is your broccoli will bolt. Now, let's see here. It also gives you directions on the back of here of how deep you should plant it, how long it should take, an estimate of how long it should take for the plant to grow, as well as how big it'll get. Say if you're doing it in containers, how big this plant will get. All this information is important, especially if you're going to put plants in a container together. You need to know that this, like broccoli plants, they spread out, and they may shade out something that you have that's growing underneath them that stays kind of short. Like say you're trying to grow broccoli and lettuce together. Lettuce does not grow tall, so the broccoli will outgrow the lettuce, and it'll cause a canopy over top of the lettuce where the lettuce can't get any sunlight, and it'll prevent it from growing. So you just want to be mindful of that. Also, the spacing. I did a video last year about how to make seed tape, but basically what you want to do is you want to space the plants out based off of this so that they're not shading each other and competing with each other. So what you want to do is look on here. You can take these seeds and actually, if you're going to direct sow, which I'm explaining what that is now, direct sowing means you just directly plant these plants into the soil. You don't do what is called transplanting, where you grow them indoors and then you let the plants sprout and you let them grow for a little while, and then you plant them into the ground or into your container. When you direct sow, you put that seed directly where it's going to be permanently. So if it's in a container, you're going to plant it directly into your container garden, or if you're doing a raised bed, or if you're planting directly in the ground, you're going to plant that seed directly into the ground. But you want to make sure if you plant these seeds that you come in and you do what is called thinning them out, where if you planted a whole bunch of seeds together, you want to make sure you come back in once they start to sprout and you thin them out to that distance between each other so that you won't have crowding. When you have plants that crowd each other, what they do is they just compete with each other instead of doing what they're supposed to do and growing and making your whatever you're going to harvest. What they'll do is just compete, and then you'll just have these weak plants that just fought against each other for the entire growth season. So you don't want that. So you want to make sure you have enough distance between them and things like that. All right. So this one has organic on here. You don't necessarily have to buy organic seeds, and I'm going to explain to you why. Basically, once the plant gets to the level where it's starting to seed over, they're not spraying anything on the plant anymore anyway. So the seeds are harvested usually once the plant is dying. That's when you're supposed to harvest seeds. That's when you know they're mature and things like that. So you can get organic seeds. They're just going to cost you more. You don't have to get organic. Now, if you're going to do if you're USDA certified organic, then you probably have to abide by those rules and actually purchase organic seeds to abide by the USDA standards and things like that. And I'll do another video another day explaining what USDA organic actually means, because a lot of times people are under the impression that things like what do you call it? Things like pesticides and things aren't used. In reality, they are used on that. So I wanted to show you guys if I can find some pelleted seeds. I don't know. All right, so if you're going to grow lettuce, you can see lettuce seeds are very small. And they have seeds that are called pelleted, and it'll say it on the pack. And I don't have any over here. I thought I brought some, but it was spinach, and they're not pelleted. But basically what the seeds are, they are wrapped in, they're like little white balls that they put this, it's like a gelatinous type of material. So once you plant the seeds and water it, what happens is that gelatin will break down, and then the seed gets exposed, and then it can sprout. When they're pelleted, it just makes them easier to handle. If you're trying to plant lettuce seeds, I would recommend you make like a tape with the lettuce seeds spaced out the distance they need to be, or you transplant them or something like that. Now, if you use the pelleted seeds, you can direct sow, and you don't have to, over crowd your seeds and things like that. So look on the label, and it should say pelleted on there. I wish I have to find, maybe take a picture and post it in the comments. But yes, so lettuce seeds are very small. Collard green seeds are very small. All the brassica plants. So brassica plants are collards, broccoli, cauliflower, radishes, mustard, kale. All of those seeds are very small. So I recommend you try to make seed tape with those, so you're not having to deal with these little tiny seeds, and then you having to go back and actually thin out and things like that. Hello, awesome knowledge. I'm listening. Oh, hey, hi, Mark. How are you? All right. So things like squash. Pumpkins are related to squash plants. They're all in the same family, curcubits. These plants, if you're trying to grow pumpkins, they are not container friendly, and nor are they like small space friendly. If you're going to grow a pumpkin plant, this plant is going to take up a lot of space. It's going to vine out. It produces these really, really long vines that have these huge leaves, and then it'll start to produce flowers, and then it'll actually fruit once those flowers are pollinated. So growing pumpkins in a small confined space is probably not a good idea. You can trellis the vine, but if once the fruit starts to develop, you're going to have to create slings to catch it, and they can get very heavy. Pumpkins can get very big depending on the variety that you're growing. And you want to make sure that if you're going to grow them on a trellis, that the slings are strong enough to hold them. If not, it's going to pull the vine down. It can damage the vine, and it can also, of course, damage the fruit if it falls and drops to the ground. So just remember that if you're trying to grow pumpkins, as well as some other plants like cantaloupe, things like this, you're going to have to, if you're going to grow them in containers, you're going to have to trellis those vines. If not, you're going to have some issues with the plant just taking over your whole space. Same thing with watermelon. It's in that same family of plants. You're going to have to trellis if you're going to grow in a small space. Again, look at the back. It'll explain when you should plant these. When it comes to any type of squash plant, it's going to have to be when it's warm outside. So it's going to have to be at least 65, 70 degrees consistently for the plants to do well. If not, they will die, or they will just never develop. Watermelons, they like it hot. So they come from Africa. They come from the tropics of Africa. So they're going to like it hot, consistent temperatures for a number of days. And once the temperature starts to drop in the fall, your vine will start to die back, and any fruit that's developing, it probably will not mature, and so you'll just won't be able to harvest it. So all of these plants that I'm showing you so far, you can grow these outside in the soil, as well as you can grow them in hydroponics. So you can even grow, pumpkin plants and things in hydroponics as well, as long as you have the space and the means to protect the plant. Now, when it comes to corn, this is a different story. So corn, I like growing corn. I've grown a lot of corn over the last 5 years. I like growing sweet corn. The variety that I like to grow, they actually discontinued the seeds. It was called Sweet Marai. I'm glad I still have some seeds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grow the seeds that I have left this year, and I'm going to save some of the cobs and collect seeds, so I'll have more to grow in subsequent years. But corn is an interesting plant. Number one, it's a grass. It grows very fast, but you must plant it when it's warm outside. It has to be about 60-65 degrees. Also, you need to make sure you space it properly and also get the seeds deep enough. Corn, it has a shallow root system, which means once you plant it, the roots don't go very deep into the ground, so things like wind and heavy rain and things can knock your stalks over. Also with corn, you need to plant it either in blocks or in rows because it's a wind pollinated plant. So it's similar to marijuana. It requires some type of wind to pick up the pollen and drop it onto the silks of the plant, which is the female part of the plant, and then that causes pollination. So each one of these kernels is actually a seed that was connected to a silk. And I've done quite a few videos about how to grow corn, as well as watching corn grow. And then I've had some issues with weather coming in and knocking my stalks down and stuff. And so if you want to view those, you can just go to Facebook Live. Just go to the Facebook search and type in my name and type in corn, and it should pull up those videos and pictures and stuff. But corn, people have grown it in containers. It does all right. I've only grown it out in ground in rows, but people do grow it in containers. It does not have to have a pollinator. What you'll see is when you're actually growing the corn, you'll see a lot of bees and things coming up and taking the pollen off of the tassels at the top. But in reality, they don't need a pollinator. They don't need an insect to pollinate them because they're pollinated by the wind. Now, you can hand pollinate. You can take some of that pollen, shake it into a bag, and then take it down to the silks that are on the bottom part of the plant. Dip those silks in there, and you can get better pollination. So there's ways to do this. So like I said, you can grow corn in containers. People have done it. The plants get very tall depending on variety you're growing. I recommend growing sweet corn if you're going to consume it. Now, if you're going to do other things with it, like mill it and make cornmeal and things like that, you're probably going to want to use field corn or like a white variety of corn that's not sweet corn. I talked to kids recently about the different types of corn. There's popping corn and things like that. So if you're going to grow corn, you want to look at the label. You want to see what the requirements are. You want to actually definitely see when you're supposed to plant it based off where you live, using those USDA zones. Because if a frost comes and hits it, it's going to wipe out all your plants. Let's see here. I'm awesome. Thanks for asking. I had no idea that corn was a grass. Yep, corn is a grass, and so is bamboo. Bamboo is also a grass. That's why it grows so fast. And but those are all grasses, yeah. And then the watermelon did originate from Africa. Let's see. All right, peppers. So if you're growing peppers, you should have started your pepper seeds back. If you're in the zone I live in, all the way up to Canada, you should have started your pepper seeds about a month ago. It takes about 6 to 8 weeks to grow before they're ready to be transplanted outdoors. You want to transplant peppers outside after there's no more threats of frost. If a frost comes around, it will wipe out your plant. So you want to make sure that you're planting them into the season where spring has finally sprung, and there's no threat of say a frost or anything coming through. With peppers, when you're starting the seeds, what you want to do is you want to use a heat mat, because if you don't use a heat mat, peppers they only germinate. Germinate means that the plants will actually sprout from the seed. They only germinate at high temperatures, usually between 85 and 90 degrees. So if you have them sitting in your house and it's like 65, 70 most of the time, low humidity, it's going to take forever for these to sprout. So get a seedling mat. Use a humidity dome, the little clear domes you put on top, and put them on that seedling mat. I can usually get peppers, if I do this method, I can get them to sprout within a week, versus it taking it, if the temperature's not right, it'll take it up to 21 days or longer. Once they sprout, you'll want to remove that humidity dome so that fungi doesn't start growing on the soil, and then put them under a grow light. Give them about 12 hours of light a day, and they'll do fine. And like I said, they require 6 to 8 weeks of growing before you can transplant them outside. You want to harden them off. Harden off means you want to put them outside and let them gradually get used to being outdoors and being exposed to the elements outdoors, because basically you've been babying them for those 6 to 8 weeks, so you control the whole environment. When you put them outside, it can be a shock to plants, and what happens if you don't let them harden off, when you plant them, they'll just kind of flop down. Eventually they will recover, but it's going to take a while. So just harden them off prepares them for going outside to those extreme conditions. Again, there's container varieties that they stay pretty small, the plant itself, but you'll still get a decent harvest. So again, if you're trying to grow in containers, or you're trying to grow indoors, or you're trying to grow in a small space, I recommend get container friendly plants. All right, with the tomatoes, there's 2 different types of tomatoes. Oh, this is where I said pelleted. I can show you this tomato. This is what a pelleted seed is going to look like. So it'll say pelleted seeds on here. The tomato seeds are kind of small. They're not tiny, but they can be kind of bothersome when you're trying to plant a lot of them. But I want to show you what pelleted seeds look like. So this is a pelleted seed. Let's see if we can. They're they're white. That, like I said, they have this gelatinous material, and once you wet it, it kind of dissolves away, and then the seed is exposed, and then it'll actually sprout. So like I say, they have pelleted seeds and lettuce and all the small seeded plants. They'll do the pelleted seeds, and it just makes it easier for you to handle. But what I wanted to show you on the tomatoes is a term called, I don't know if you can see this. It'll say indeterminate, or it'll say determinate. So if you're growing in containers, you want the tomatoes that are determinates. Determinate means that they only grow to a determined height. They'll kind of bush out, and they won't vine out. So you want to get determinate tomato plants when you're growing in containers. If you're growing indeterminates in containers, you're going to have to create a trellis to accommodate that viney growth that these plants are going to do. Indeterminates will grow in containers, but they get huge and they take over space. So it's recommended that you get determinates. With the determinates, what will happen is they'll grow to a determined height, they'll flower and fruit, and then the plant kind of dies off. With the indeterminates, they'll keep growing and growing and growing until something kills the vine, whether it's the frost, or you kill the vine directly, or some insect or pest or something comes in and destroys the vine. So people like in South Florida, if they're growing indeterminate varieties of tomatoes, they have tomato plants that have been growing for 5 years or more, and they're still producing fruit, because it never gets cold in South Florida to where it'll actually kill the vine. So they have these huge tomato plants, and also pepper plants as well, that have keep living for year to year. Up here in Ohio, because we get winter and it gets cold, our tomatoes and pepper plants are just usually annual, and they usually die out once the cold weather hits. Now if you're growing in a greenhouse or indoors, you can extend that life of that plant for however you want to, as long as you don't kill the vine and you're providing it everything that it needs. With tomatoes plants, once the plant starts to grow, you can actually take what are called cuttings or clones, and you can take those and you can actually start new plants. What you'll do is you'll take those cuttings, put them in water, let them root, and then you can plant them again, either in a hydroponic system or you can plant them in soil. And as the year goes on, I'll do some demonstrations on how to do these different things, and I'll have them on my YouTube as well as my Patreon page. But just know, if you're growing in containers, you're growing tomatoes in containers, you want determinate varieties. If you want to grow indeterminate varieties, you're going to have to trellis the plant. And again, tomatoes, they need hot temperatures as well. Let's see. So if you're growing things like Swiss chard, let's see, spinach, cilantro, mustard greens, you're gonna have to grow them while it's still cool outdoors. So you're gonna have to start those at about like now. If you're gonna direct sow, put the seeds out there now and they'll sprout and things like that. You may have to cover them if there's a frost coming through at night or something. But they do well when it's cool outside. Once July, August heat hits, these plants are not going to do well. Things like cilantro will bolt, which means they'll go to flower to make seeds, and the leaves are just taste horrible then because they're putting all the energy into making flowers and they're taking all those sugars and things out of the leaves. So anytime you're going to try to grow leafy greens, you want to grow it when it's cool outside, or you want to grow them indoors, maybe in hydroponics when it gets really hot outside. Again, I have some flower seeds as well. Same thing. Even if you're just trying to grow flowers, you need to make sure you're looking at the when you're supposed to plant them, as well as their requirements, how to space them, and things like that. It's recommended to grow flowers near your plants because this will attract pollinators, especially for plants that need to be pollinated. A lot of the squash plants need actual pollination. Tomatoes, they actually pollinate themselves. All you have to do is come in, something has to shake the vine, and it'll drop the pollen onto the female part of the flower. So the male and female parts are in the same flower, versus on like a squash plant, the male and female parts are in separate flowers. So you have a female flower and you have a male flower. So that's why you have to have a pollinator come in and pollinate those for you. These zinnias are good plants at attracting things like butterflies and stuff. Bees, they're more attracted to like and also like dandelions and wildflowers. A lot of flowers that we consider weeds are what are really attracted to honeybees and other bees. Now, we don't want to just attract honeybees, we want to attract all bees. All bees are pollinators. All bees use pollen, and they also use nectar. Just some of them use it for different things, but just know that we want all bees, not just we don't just want honeybees. Zucchini, again, it's a squash plant. It's in the squash plant family. It doesn't vine out like other plants. It does create this really like condensed vine, but these plants get very, very big. Unless it has like container friendly on here, these plants are not recommended for container growing. And just know, even when you plant them in the ground, that they get huge and they will take over an area and they will shade out other plants. With zucchini, the fruit grows like overnight. Once it starts to flower and it starts to get pollinated and things like that, the fruit grows like astronomically fast. So you can get pollinated one day and you'll be harvesting zucchini the next day. So you need to watch them because they get huge if you don't harvest them, and then eventually they get fibrous and nasty where you can't eat them if they get too big because the seeds start to develop in there. I think that's it for right now. Trying to see if there's anything else. I guess once some of my stuff starts growing, I'll do more videos, especially explaining different insects that you may find on a lot of these plants. I know one insect you're going to have issues with coming up real soon with the brassica plants, which are your collard greens, again, your kale, your mustard, radish, broccoli, cauliflower, and that's going to be the cabbage worms. If you see those little white butterflies flying around your garden or around your yard, know that they're not just cute. They are actually mating, and they're laying eggs on your brassica plants. So you need to know that. that they are laying those eggs, and those eggs will hatch and they'll create those cabbage worms, those little green caterpillars that eat up your collard plants. And so to control them, you're going to want to use BT. And I've done a video. I also have a whole post about what BT is, which is a bacteria. It's a biological control that you use to control caterpillars and how to control them. And I'll repost that probably sometime over the weekend. Does anybody have any questions before I get out of here? I just wanted to do this short video explaining some things, because I know people go and they'll see these seeds and they get intimidated, because I mean, it's hundreds and hundreds of packs there, and you're like, what do I do if I've never done this before? So anybody have any questions? Let's see here. Well, I thank you guys for watching. I know it's Friday evening, and I know this probably wasn't the most entertaining Facebook Live, but I just thought I'd make this just so you guys can get started. Things like the squash plants, you can actually direct sow those seeds directly into the ground once the threat of frost has passed. Same thing with corn. Most of the seeds, once the threat of frost is passed, you can pretty much directly sow those into the ground. Things like tomatoes and peppers, those are the things you want to transplant, and you need to start growing those. You need to actually start growing those 6 to 8 weeks ago, so they'll get a good start. If you don't want to start plants, or you don't want to start seeds, you can always go to your local nurseries and things and purchase already started plants, and you can directly transplant those into your gardens, and that makes it easy. But I think I recommend people at least, grow from seeds, so they can get this whole concept under control, and they understand it. It's a lot cheaper to start from seed than it is to actually go out and buy those started plants. A packet of seeds can cost you, like these were $1.44, and a lot of times they're even cheaper than that. They'll put them on sale, and you get enough seeds in here where you can grow a decent amount of plants that will give you a decent harvest. So I would recommend everybody learn how to start their plants from seed. And then there's, like I said, there's other ways you can actually start plants from cuttings and things like that. But learning the seed process, growing from seed to a mature plant that you harvest from is like very rewarding, and you get to see the whole process of how that plant actually grows. So you understand, how things even get to the grocery store. Like, it doesn't just show up there. There's a process to get it there. But if you guys have any questions, you can always put them in the comments. You can send me a messenger message. If you're on Instagram, you can send me a direct message on Instagram. Or you can send me an email, urbanfarmsister@gmail.com. Alright, well, I'll talk with you guys later. Have a good evening. Have a nice weekend.